started with the faintest creak, a sound so small I almost ignored it. But when I opened my eyes that night, I saw something in the hallway, something that didn't belong. A tall, unmoving shadow stood just outside my bedroom door, silhouetted by the faint glow of the streetlight. My heart froze as I realized it wasn't a trick of the light. Someone, or something, was in my house, and what I discovered the next morning would haunt me forever. I'll never forget that night. It's burned into my memory like a scar. I had just moved into a small, old apartment near the city. It wasn't glamorous, but it was cheap and perfect for starting over after a messy breakup. The first few nights were quiet, peaceful even, but on the fifth night, everything changed. It was a little after 3 a.m. when I woke up to the sound of creaking floorboards. My apartment was old, and the wooden floors often made noise, but this was different, deliberate, slow, like someone was trying not to be heard. My stomach churned. I told myself it was just my upstairs neighbor, or maybe the building settling, but as I lay there in the dark, ears straining, I heard it again, closer this time. A soft, almost hesitant creak directly outside my bedroom door. I turned my head, my heart hammering in my chest, and that's when I saw it. A shadow. Tall, slender, and completely still. It loomed in the hallway, illuminated by the faint light from the street lamp outside my window. I froze, barely daring to breathe. "Hello?" I whispered, my voice cracking. No answer. The shadow didn't move. It just stood there, eerily silent. My mind raced. Was it a trick of the light? Was I still dreaming? Or worse, was someone in my apartment? I don't know how long I lay there, staring at the shadow, but it felt like hours. Every instinct in my body screamed at me to stay put, but curiosity, or stupidity, got the better of me. I grabbed my phone, its faint glow barely cutting through the darkness, and turned on the flashlight. In the beam of light, the hallway was empty. The shadow was gone. My heart pounded in relief, but a nagging unease lingered. Had I imagined it? I wasn't so sure. The next morning, I decided to investigate. My front door was locked, deadbolt and all, just as I'd left it. But as I turned to head back inside, something caught my eye. Muddy footprints. They started at my front door and led down the hallway, stopping right outside my bedroom. I felt sick. Someone had been in my apartment. I called the landlord immediately, demanding to know how anyone could have gotten in. He seemed just as shocked as I was, assuring me that the locks had been changed before I moved in. Still, I wasn't convinced. That night, I didn't sleep. I propped a chair under the doorknob and kept a kitchen knife by my bed. Hours passed in silence until, around 2:45 a.m., I heard it again. The same slow, deliberate creaking. My blood turned to ice. This time, I didn't wait. I shot out of bed and flung the door open, my flashlight cutting through the hallway. Again, it was empty. But then, I noticed something I hadn't seen before. A small attic hatch in the ceiling at the end of the hallway. The next morning, I called a friend to help me check it out. We climbed up, and what we found still haunts me. Someone had been living in the attic. There was a pile of old blankets, a flashlight, empty food wrappers, and a notebook filled with scribbled notes. The worst part? One of the pages listed my name, followed by detailed notes about my daily routine. I moved out that week. The police told me it wasn't the first report of an intruder in the area. To this day, I double-check every lock and avoid apartments with attics. Sometimes, late at night, I think about that shadow and wonder, What would have happened if I'd fallen asleep? It was supposed to be a simple drive home, a quiet night on an empty highway. But when we saw the man standing by the side of the road, waving us down, everything changed. At first, he seemed harmless, even polite, but by the time we dropped him off, something felt off. When we found the bloody knife he left behind, we realized the horrifying truth. We had just given a ride to someone who wasn't just lost. He was hunting. My girlfriend and I were driving home late one night after visiting friends in a nearby town. It was a long stretch of rural highway, dark and deserted, except for the occasional flicker of headlights in the distance. The hum of the engine and the steady rhythm of the tires against the pavement were the only sounds keeping us company. As we rounded a bend, the headlights caught something ahead. A man standing by the side of the road, his arm raised in a desperate wave. He wore a tattered jacket and jeans, and his face was partially obscured by shadows. "Should we stop?" my girlfriend asked, her voice uncertain. I hesitated. Picking up a hitchhiker in the middle of nowhere seemed like a bad idea, but something about him looked helpless. He wasn't holding a bag or anything suspicious, and I figured he might just need a ride to the nearest gas station. Against my better judgment, I slowed down and pulled over. The man approached the car cautiously, his hands visible at his sides. "Thank you," he said, his voice low and gravelly. "I just need a lift to the next town. My car broke down a few miles back." He slid into the back seat, his movements stiff and deliberate. Up close, he looked rough. His clothes were worn, and his face was gaunt, like he hadn't eaten or slept in days. But he was polite, thanking us again as we got back on the road. For the first few miles, he didn't say much, and the silence in the car felt suffocating. My girlfriend tried to make small talk, asking where he was from and what he was doing out so late, but his answers were vague and clipped. Something about him felt off. I couldn't put my finger on it, but there was a tension in the air that hadn't been there before. I kept glancing at him in the rearview mirror, watching as he stared out the window with an expression I couldn't read. After about 20 minutes, we reached a small gas station on the edge of town. "This is fine," the man said abruptly, breaking the silence. He thanked us again as he got out and walked into the dimly lit parking lot. As we pulled back onto the highway, I felt a strange sense of relief, but then my girlfriend gasped, her voice sharp with panic. "What's that smell?" The car reeked of something metallic and foul, like rust and decay. I pulled over and turned on the interior light, and that's when we saw it. Under the seat where the man had been sitting was a bloodied knife wrapped in a dirty cloth. My stomach dropped. My girlfriend stared at me, her face pale. What the hell is that?" she whispered. We didn't know what to do. Should we call the police? Go back to the gas station? My hands trembled as I dialed 911, explaining what had happened and where we had dropped the man off. The dispatcher's voice was calm but urgent. "Stay where you are. Officers are on their way." When the police arrived, they took the knife and asked us to describe the man. As we gave them details, one of the officers exchanged a look with his partner, his expression grim. "You're lucky," he said finally. "That man matches the description of a suspect we've been looking for. He's connected to multiple violent crimes in this area." I felt like I was going to be sick. My girlfriend was shaking, tears streaming down her face. We had let that man into our car, sat within arm's reach of him, and had no idea just how dangerous he was. The police never told us exactly what the man had done, but I didn't need details to know how close we had come to disaster. For weeks after, I couldn't stop thinking about what might have happened if we hadn't stopped at the gas station, or if the man had decided to turn on us instead of leaving the knife behind. To this day, I can't drive down a dark highway without looking over my shoulder, wondering if someone might be waiting in the shadows. I'll never pick up a hitchhiker again. It started with a faint scratching sound coming from above my bedroom. I thought it was just mice, maybe a raccoon, but night after night the noises got louder, more deliberate. Then I found something that sent chills down my spine, a half-eaten sandwich and an old blanket hidden in the attic. Someone was living in my house, watching me while I slept. And when I finally confronted the truth, it was far worse than I could have imagined. The first time I heard it, I didn't think much of it. A soft shuffling sound, like something dragging across the attic floor. It was an old house, and strange noises came with the territory. I chalked it up to rodents and went back to sleep, but the noises didn't stop. Over the next few nights, they became more frequent. Footsteps, slow and deliberate, pacing back and forth above my room. I couldn't ignore it anymore. One night, around 2 a.m., I decided to investigate. Armed with a flashlight and a broom, I climbed the creaky ladder to the attic. The air was musty and thick, and the beam of my flashlight cut through the darkness, illuminating piles of forgotten junk and cobwebs. But there was nothing unusual, no sign of animals. Relieved, I went back downstairs, telling myself I was overthinking things. A week later, I was cleaning out my spare bedroom when I noticed something strange. The small attic door in the ceiling was slightly ajar. I hadn't touched it since my last visit, and I was sure it had been closed. My heart pounded as I grabbed a chair and climbed up to push the door open. As I peeked inside, my flashlight revealed something that stopped me cold. A crumpled blanket and an old, half-eaten sandwich tucked into the corner. I froze. Someone had been up there. Recently, I climbed down as fast as I could, locking every door and window in the house before calling the police. 2 officers arrived within minutes and searched the attic thoroughly. They assured me there was no one there, but their uneasy expressions told me they didn't think this was just a prank. They advised me to stay vigilant and left. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay awake, straining to hear every creak and groan of the old house. Around 3 a.m., I heard it again. Soft footsteps above me, slow and deliberate. Fear coursed through me, but this time, I wasn't going to wait. I grabbed my phone, dialed 911, and whispered to the dispatcher, explaining what was happening. They told me to stay on the line and wait for the officers to arrive. Minutes later, I heard a new sound, the attic door creaking open. I bolted out of my bedroom and locked myself in the bathroom, clutching my phone like a lifeline. From inside, I heard faint movements, someone coming down from the attic. My breath hitched as I listened to footsteps wandering through the house. The sound stopped just outside the bathroom door. I held my breath, my heart hammering in my chest. A soft knock broke the silence, followed by a low, raspy voice. "I know you're in there." I nearly dropped the phone as the dispatcher reassured me that officers were minutes away. Then came the sound of sirens in the distance, and just like that, the footsteps retreated. When the police arrived, they found the front door wide open, but no sign of the intruder. The next morning, I decided to face my fears and return to the attic with the police. What they found was horrifying. Along with the blanket and food, there was a small notebook filled with ramblings, pages describing my daily routines, what I wore, even how long I spent in the shower. The most chilling part, a detailed sketch of my bedroom with a note that read, "Watch her tonight." The police believed the intruder had been living in my attic for weeks, possibly months, entering and leaving through a small gap in the roof I hadn't noticed. They told me I was lucky. Many cases like this don't end so cleanly. I moved out the following week, unable to stay in a house that no longer felt like mine. To this day, I double-check every attic and crawl space before settling into a new place. The thought that someone was watching me, studying me, waiting for the right moment. It's a fear I can't shake. And the worst part, they never caught him. It was midnight when I heard the first knock. It was soft, almost hesitant, but loud enough to jolt me out of my half-asleep haze. I crept to the door and peeked through the peephole, expecting to see a neighbor or maybe a delivery mix-up. But instead, I saw him, an older man with a crooked smile, standing there in the dark, staring directly at the door. What happened next still keeps me awake at night. I had always loved living alone. There was a sense of peace in the quiet evenings and the freedom to do what I wanted without interruption. But that peace shattered one cold December night. It was a little after midnight when I first heard it, a faint knock on my front door. At first, I thought I was imagining it. My apartment complex wasn't exactly bustling, and uninvited visitors were rare. But then it came again, louder this time. Knock, knock, knock. I got up from the couch, my heart beating faster than it should have. Who would be knocking this late? I thought, trying to convince myself it was probably a neighbor who needed something. Still, I couldn't shake the gnawing unease as I approached the door. Peeking through the peephole, I froze. There, standing on my porch, was an older man. His face was partially hidden by the shadows, but what I could see chilled me to the bone. A strange, crooked smile stretched across his face, his eyes fixed on the peephole, as if he knew I was watching. "Hello?" I called out, trying to keep my voice steady. "Can I help you?" He didn't respond. He just stood there, motionless, with that same unsettling grin. A part of me wanted to open the door and demand answers, but something in my gut screamed at me to stay put. After a long, tense moment, he finally spoke. "Can I come in?" His voice was low and gravelly, almost a whisper. "No," I said immediately, my heart racing. "You need to leave." For a moment, I thought he might comply, but instead, he leaned closer to the door and said, "Are you sure? I just need to come inside for a moment." I backed away from the door, grabbing my phone. My hands shook as I dialed 911. While I explained the situation to the dispatcher, the man continued to stand there, occasionally tapping on the door with his knuckles, slow and deliberate. The dispatcher assured me that an officer was on the way, but it felt like an eternity before I heard the faint sound of sirens in the distance. When I looked through the peephole again, the man was gone. The police arrived shortly after, searching the area but finding no trace of him. They told me he was likely just a drifter was someone under the influence, but their reassurances did little to calm my nerves. For the next few nights, I couldn't sleep. Every creak of the floorboards, every gust of wind outside made my heart race. I started double-checking the locks on all my doors and windows, convinced he might come back. And then he did. It was around the same time, just after midnight, when I heard it again. Knock, knock, knock. This time, I didn't approach the door. I stayed in